Welcome back, AI curious folk. I'm Michael Parekh, your human AI guide for this episode 65 of AI Ramblings Daily. Thanks for joining us. A lot to cover today, especially ahead of a big Wednesday evening, given the earnings of 4 of the 7 Mag 7s. Today's focus, because of what's going to be discussed in most of those earnings calls, is AI infrastructure. It's AI infrastructure all the way through. The key items I want to go through and kind of tie it into the broader theme for today are three key items. Number one, OpenAI, which has been in the pole position of announcing spending plans of almost $1.5 trillion and then gated back to about $600-700 billion over the next 2 or 3 years. OpenAI is evolving strategy beyond Stargate. This was something that they announced 2 or 3 years ago, first with Microsoft, then with Softbank, and now it's evolving into a different strategy, and I'm going to talk about that. Number two, I want to talk about Google rolling out its 8th-generation TPUs. This goes up right against Nvidia's AI GPUs. Nvidia's AI GPUs will still be the market leader globally in a position of over 60-70% of the AI chips, but Google is coming on strong, as are, of course, companies like Amazon with its Trainium chips, Meta, OpenAI. Everybody has their own versions of chips, but Google's TPUs are in the pole position after Nvidia, and I'm going to go through that. Third thing is South Korea. They have, with their two big electronics companies, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, especially because of the memory boom, which I've been talking about for a long time here, both on AI Reset to Zero Substack and also on the podcast. All the links will be in the show notes. South Korea has gone and breached the $4 trillion market cap in stock market valuation, taking the number 8 position from the UK. It's interesting to note that the UK was double the South Korean market cap only 2 years ago. So a lot has changed. South Korea alone has been up over 45% this year because of the global memory shortage, which I've talked about and will continue to talk about. So what does that mean for today's theme? The frame running through the discussion, both in the earnings calls to come this evening and operations of a lot of the companies we've been talking about, is AI infrastructure and investment and pricing dynamics are going to be the key show, not just for this quarter, but for the next 3 years at least. And so let's get into that a little bit more detail. On OpenAI evolving beyond Stargate, this is a relatively big shift, but it's been evolving very quickly. It got started, Stargate was this plan where OpenAI wanted to build its own infrastructure by raising a lot of money and basically building and owning infrastructure. They started this plan initially with Microsoft, who was their key partner for a bunch of years until yesterday when that deal got modified. I wrote about it in the Substack post yesterday. And now OpenAI is going to be basically partnering with a whole host of providers like CoreWeave, Oracle, and a whole bunch of others who will be building for hundreds of billions of dollars of monies that OpenAI will raise, but they will not necessarily own that infrastructure. The infrastructure will be financed through all kinds of mechanisms, partnerships with private equity firms, sovereign wealth fund investors, and a whole range of others. So it is a shift from buy and build to a buy and rent type of a strategy. And so Stargate is evolving. A number of senior executives at OpenAI who had been implementing that have gone on to other adventures and ventures, and OpenAI is going to continue to build AI compute as massively as they can. And obviously, as I've talked also about this in the last few days, they have to balance the financial metric dynamics. So both their revenues and their spend ahead of their anticipated mega AI IPO later this year, where they're competing against Anthropic to get their IPO done as fast as possible. And of course, Elon Musk, who has his own SpaceX XAI IPO up this June. So a lot of moving parts here, but I wanted to highlight this as a key piece, and there's a lot of detail that's going to be in the links and also in my Substack post following this podcast. So there'll be a little bit additional detail on this if you'd like. Number two, Google is rolling out today at their cloud event their 8th generation TPU. This has been a big thing and a big advantage for Google for a number of years. The TPUs, the tensor processing units, have been the processing for AI that they have used against Nvidia's GPUs, mostly for their own use, for the 3+ billion users of a variety of Google search services, plus at least half a dozen services at Google, Gmail, Docs, etc., Maps, that each have a billion users globally. So the TPUs have been rolling out AI functionality, AI ad functionality for their users, but most importantly, they're now using the TPU infrastructure through their Google Cloud hyperscale business to be used by a lot of their core partners, like OpenAI actually, and a whole host of others. Meta and others are using TPUs. And this is the big advantage. The latest chips have a lot more processing and a lot more inference capabilities that are notable. So again, there'll be a lot more detail in the write-ups in the show notes. But I wanted to highlight that it doesn't mean that NVIDIA necessarily loses. It's not a zero-sum game in my mind. So they will not necessarily lose out on opportunities. My key take here is that both of these are going to be the two contenders to watch, with everyone else coming on. And the demand for AI compute, both in training and inference at the foundation model level, remains big enough for most of the players right now. And so this is not yet a zero-sum game, at least not the next 2 or 3 years. So my take on this one remains that this is an expanding area, and it's kind of similar to the take I just articulated for OpenAI and their opportunity to build a lot of infrastructure with hundreds of billions of dollars, assuming they can get all the financing, and have enough headroom versus a lot of the other Mag 7s who, as of tonight, will be talking about their plans, Meta in particular, Google, etc., in terms of how they're expanding AI compute infrastructure. The third item, again, as I talked about earlier, is memory. I've written a lot about memory shortages being a key issue, not just for data centers, even with $700 billion being invested by the industry this year and probably $1 trillion next year. But a lot of that capacity basically in the hands of companies like SK Hynix and Samsung and Micron here in the US and a number of others. Those three companies in particular have 70-80% of the global market. And they have been, they're basically not only just doing the high bandwidth memory, HBM, but also the memory that goes into our phones and computers. And as a result, on the phones and computer side, we've already seen prices for these devices and their availability go down. The prices go up from less than 10% of the billable materials on these things a couple of years ago to over 20 to 30% this year, and going to maybe 40% or more next year. Memory prices are still on the way up, and that is being reflected in the stocks of these companies, which have taken South Korea's stock market up almost 50% this year, with basically crossing $4 trillion, as I mentioned. And again, the two big beneficiaries are the South Korean companies, SK Hynix and Samsung. And one of my takes here is that it's notable that this has happened also within Asia, in terms of South Korea taking a lead over Japan, which has traditionally been very strong on the memory side of the equation. But again, right place, right time, and an amazing amount of execution. Core partners, obviously, with everyone from Nvidia to Google. But it's a space to watch. A lot of moving parts. And the one other thing I will highlight, which kind of leads into our next topic, is that Apple also remains a big player in chips and memory, as I've talked about, with its own Apple Silicon and its multi-year forward contracts that lock in huge chunks of memory supply inventory from the same companies I've been talking about, the Korean companies and a whole host of others. And that leads me to the gadget AI portion of our discussion today. And there, the core thing I wanted to touch on, and there was a Bloomberg article, which again, will be in the links, where they talk about that Apple is planning on having a Siri enabled photo app, and the photography app is an important thing to kind of keep in mind. It's something that we don't think about a lot, but iPhones have become the leading camera on the planet, with over 2.5 billion people using these devices, going back a bunch of years now, for their main camera for everything. Apple and Google, in particular, with their Android and Pixel cameras, have introduced this whole notion of computational photography, which is a lot of software adjunct to their camera apps. But what's important is that Siri, which is going to be AI enabled with the help of Google Gemini, and I've written a lot about this as well, there's going to be a new version of iOS 27, which will have a lot of features built in to the photo app on iOS, with the camera button on the iPhones that was just introduced a couple of years ago, basically enabling a lot of AI Siri functionality. The reason I'm focused on this granular item is that this is a key bottom-up AI application for Siri that is being embedded into these applications. And presumably that functionality will also be available to third-party developers on Apple's App Store, which remains the most profitable app store on the planet. Even though Android is far bigger in unit terms around the world, the Apple App Store remains the biggest moneymaker for developers. And Apple at WWDC is likely to introduce a whole bunch of additional features, support for AI protocols like MCP, app intent, which are all these buzzwords, but they're important because they will allow a lot of granular building in of AI that app companies today don't necessarily need to put in their own AI models into these systems. But Apple can basically include both large and small models, especially with their partnership with Gemini, in their iPhones, in their wearables, and most importantly, on their computers, the MacBooks and the Mac Minis and so on, with huge amount of local processing in terms of the Apple Silicon neural processors, GPUs, and of course the CPUs. And again, a lot of techie stuff here, but it's a very key differentiation for Apple over the next 2 or 3 years. They, because of their supply chain math and their capability in terms of vertical integration and fusing of software and hardware relative to all competitors, have a key advantage on AI application and all manner of gadgets. And this Siri in the iPhone camera app is just the beginning. So that's why I wanted to focus on that in the gadget section of today's discussion. And then in terms of today's questions from listeners, just to end it with something that's relevant to what we've been discussing. One question was, what's the key AI product that I am most looking forward to in 2026? And I'll jump in here with basically an extension of what I've been talking about. It's not just going to be integrated into the camera app, but there is going to be a standalone Siri app, which I'm looking forward to. Because it again will have access, presumably, into Gemini, which is already a regular and daily AI app that I use on all my devices. So the notion that Siri can be accessible not just as an app on a phone, but also across devices, AirPods, other wearables, etc., is an intriguing one, especially if Apple does do what I think they are planning to do, which is enable lots of third-party developers to leverage their hardware and software and Apple Silicon to create a lot of unique functionality, which I think will be a very differentiated app relative to the AI apps from everybody else. So ChatGPT, Anthropic is not on the consumer side, but they do have a standalone app for the phones and desktops, etc. So Apple, I think, is going to have an interesting approach here, and that's probably the one Apple product that I'm looking forward to the most. The second question that comes in kind of as a corollary to this is, what app will this that I use daily would this most likely replace? I don't know if it'll necessarily replace it, but my daily app on AI has been Perplexity. I've talked a lot about that before. Siri, if it does some of the things that I think they can do with Gemini, could end up being a zero-sum game in my use of Perplexity, but we'll see. I think Perplexity is an amazing company. They've done a lot of cool things. They continue to execute very strongly, especially with their AI browsers and Compute, which is their version of AI agent like compute, what is being offered in OpenClaw by OpenAI, and also Claude Cowork, which I've talked a lot about. So those are the two app-related things that I'm kind of looking forward to in terms of thinking through this in the next few months, especially post-June after the WWDC. So hopefully that gives you a little context in terms of the core theme, AI infrastructure. We'll have a lot more on the results of some of the big companies tomorrow. And again, any questions, feedback, please keep them coming. And thank you for joining us for ARD 65, and stay tuned.